hear me out. I know horror fans love Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, but it's a pretty terrible adaptation when it comes to comparing it to Stephen King's source material in his novel, The Shining. The Grady twins, they don't even exist in the book. I'm Deanna Chapman, and as a big Stephen King fan and the host of a Stephen King podcast called Chat Cemetery, I probably spend a little too much time thinking about these kinds of things when it comes to Stephen King's books and the adaptations that followed. You might be thinking, you're crazy. The Shining is a great movie. And yes, I totally agree. It's a fantastic horror movie, but as far as an adaptation, even Stephen King wasn't too happy with how Kubrick's The Shining compared to his novel. So let's dive into why this is a terrible adaptation, but a great horror movie. One of the big things that Stanley Kubrick changed was how Jack ended up losing his mind, basically. With Kubrick's version of The Shining, Jack seems to have been losing his mind before he even took the job and moved into the Overlook, whereas in the book, it's happening a little slower. Jack is abusive, sure, but he hasn't completely lost his mind until after they move into the Overlook, and it's sort of a slower burn in the book, basically, than it is in Kubrick's version. And with Kubrick's movie, you have that happening instantaneously, pretty much. You can tell that something is going wrong with Jack right off the bat, and he's just acting a little too strange, but the performance is played really, really well by Jack Nicholson. There's no denying that, and that's part of what makes it such a good horror movie, but not a good adaptation in those terms. Then you also have the Grady twins. Like I said, not even in the book, and they became so iconic that I think anyone who has seen Kubrick's movie but hasn't read the book probably just assumes that they are in the book. In fact, I even got confused about that because when I started my podcast, The Shining was one of the early episodes for both the book and Kubrick's movie. So I had so many thoughts on the book, but because I had more recently seen the movie, I kind of was like, wait, the Grady twins weren't in the book, right? I had to sort of second guess myself and edit part of the podcast so that I wasn't getting details wrong. And I think because of how iconic some of the stuff became with Kubrick's movie, it confused people as to what was in the book and what wasn't if they hadn't read it already. So maybe people saw Kubrick's movie, went to read the book, and then were a little disappointed because there were so many things that were different. And another thing is how Wendy is portrayed. Shelley Duvall gives the performance all she's got, and I applaud her for that. But she is definitely someone who isn't very resourceful or helpful in the movie. Whereas when you read the book or even watch Mick Garris's adaptation, which was a TV miniseries, Wendy is a little more active in trying to get them out of this situation. Whereas in Kubrick's movie, Wendy is not really all that helpful. Like I said, it's just one of those things where she screams a ton, and then you get that iconic scene where Jack takes the axe and breaks down the door and sticks his head through and says, "Here's Johnny." And you have Wendy terrified in the corner, and that plays off really, really well because, again, it goes back to just how iconic so many of the scenes were. And what makes Kubrick's The Shining a great horror movie, too, is just how well it was shot. You have the blood gushing down the hallway, you have how creepy the Grady twins look, you have this outlandish performance by Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, and it's one of those performances that when you see it, you don't forget it, and that's what makes it such a good horror movie, but really it is not a good adaptation because it strays so far from the book with certain things, and I think because it gets enough of it right at the core of the story, a lot of people are willing to overlook that. And, I'm certainly one of them because I absolutely love Kubrick's The Shining. It's one of my favorite horror movies and one of my favorite Stephen King adaptations because, as someone who hosts a Stephen King podcast, I have watched many Stephen King adaptations that aren't nearly as good as The Shining, to say the least, in quality. And it's refreshing when you get these top tier movies and you find things to love about them, even if they aren't faithful to the source material. And for me personally, I don't need everything to be extremely faithful to the source material in order to enjoy it. And if people do want that, though, you can go watch Mick Garris's adaptation of The Shining from the 90s. It was a TV miniseries. It probably ended up being about 3 or 4 hours. I can't really remember at this point, but that one definitely follows the book much more closely. And you'll sort of be able to tell what the differences are if you either watch Kubrick's The Shining and then watch Mick Garris's, or if you just read the book, which surprisingly isn't too long for a Stephen King book, as I have come to learn. But that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button, and you can follow me on social media. You can check out Welcome to Geekdom and Chat Cemetery. There are links to those things in the show description. I'll see you next time.